There is a book in the Bible that bothers, not because it is obscure or difficult to understand, but because it loudly states what most people feel inside and are afraid to admit. It begins with a declaration that sounds almost like despair. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity." These words, recorded in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2, were not written by someone who never lived. They were written by someone who lived too much, who experienced everything the world had to offer, and came back with empty hands. Ecclesiastes is the most honest book of the Bible because it does not shield the reader from reality. While other sacred texts comfort, exhort, and promise, Ecclesiastes observes. It looks at human work and questions whether it is worth it. It looks at wisdom and admits that it brings pain. It looks at pleasure, wealth, fame, and bluntly states that none of this fills the void that exists within every human being. This is not pessimism, it is diagnosis, and like every good diagnosis, it precedes healing. What makes this book even more impressive is that it was written from within the human experience, not from outside. The author does not speak as someone observing life from a distance, but as someone who has plunged into it to the depths and survived to tell about it. That is why Ecclesiastes resonates so much with people in their 30s, 50s, 60s, with those who have lived enough to know that the promises of the world are not fulfilled as announced. And it is precisely at this point of brutal honesty that chapter 12 comes in with a word that is not one of resignation, but of direction. The Hebrew name used for the author of Ecclesiastes is Koheleth, a word that carries the idea of someone who gathers people to speak, a preacher, an assembly leader. Jewish and Christian tradition has historically associated this figure with King Solomon, son of David, who ruled in Jerusalem. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verses 1 and 12 identify the author as the son of David and king in Jerusalem. And chapter 2 describes a life of extraordinary achievements, constructions, plantings, treasures, musicians, palaces, a greatness that surpassed that of all who lived before him in that land. Solomon was not speculating about life. He had consumed it whole. What motivated someone with everything to write a book about the emptiness of everything? This question is central to understanding Ecclesiastes. Koheleth did not write out of bitterness, although bitterness may appear in some verses. He wrote because there was a generation that needed to hear what he learned the hard way. There is an enormous cost in discovering the vanity of things only after having wasted decades chasing them. Koheleth wanted to spare his readers that cost. That is why the book is, at its core, an act of generosity, the generosity of someone who has erred and does not want to see others repeating the same steps. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verses 9 and 10 reveal something about Koheleth's method. He researched, pondered, and organized many proverbs. He did not merely live, he reflected on what he lived. He sought pleasant words but without sacrificing truth. This balance between beauty and honesty is what makes Ecclesiastes a singular work within the scriptures. It is not a book to be read quickly. It is a book to be felt, to be weighed, to be left to work within the soul until its questions find the answers that it itself points to at the end. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 begins with an imperative, not a suggestion, not a reflection, a direct order. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. The Hebrew verb used here, zakar, does not only mean to recall something from memory. It carries the sense of keeping something present, of acting based on that remembrance, of allowing it to guide choices. Remembering the Creator in youth is not a mental exercise, it is a posture of life. It is living with the awareness that there is a God who created, who sustains, and who one day will evaluate everything. Youth is mentioned here with a precision that is not accidental. Koheleth knew from personal experience that the years of strength and disposition pass with a speed that is only perceived when they are already gone. Youth is the time when the body obeys, when the mind absorbs more easily, when habits are formed more deeply. It is also the time when the illusion of invincibility is strongest, when God seems less urgent because death seems more distant. For this reason, the warning is directed precisely at this period, not because the other years do not matter, but because the foundations built in youth support or compromise everything that comes afterward. There is something profound in the choice of the word creator in this verse. Not Lord, not King, not Judge, creator. The one who formed, who gave life, who planted eternity in the human heart, as Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 11 had already declared. Remembering the Creator is recognizing that life is not an achievement of ours, it is a received gift. And whoever has received a gift has a different responsibility than someone who believes they have conquered everything on their own. This awareness, when planted early, changes the way a person works, loves, rests, and ages. Koheleth does not romanticize aging. He looks at this phase of life with the same honesty he applies to everything in the book, and what he describes in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, is a reality that no one escapes. Before the bad days come and the years approach, of which you will say, I find no pleasure in them. This phrase carries a silent weight. It is not a curse cast upon old age. It is a description of what happens when the body begins to give way, when energies diminish, when what was once easy requires double the effort. The bad days are not necessarily days of catastrophe. They are days in which the simple joy of being alive no longer comes with the same ease. The question that this verse raises is not whether these days will come, but what you will have built within yourself when they arrive. A person who has reached old age, having cultivated a real relationship with God, having lived with purpose and awareness, carries within them an inner reserve that the years cannot consume. On the other hand, a person who has postponed the deeper issues of life, who has indefinitely deferred the encounter with the Creator, arrives at this phase with empty hands of something that money, health, and children cannot replace. Koheleth is not preaching against old age. He is preaching against the waste of youth. There is an urgency in this warning that needs to be felt. The text does not say, perhaps the bad days will come, or if you are not careful. It says that they will come. The certainty is embedded in the grammar of the verse, and in the face of certainty, wisdom demands preparation. The same instinct that leads a person to save money for the future, to take care of their health before becoming ill, to build relationships before needing them, that same instinct applied to the spiritual dimension is what Ecclesiastes chapter 12 is asking for. Preparing for the bad days is not pessimism. It is the most intelligent way to live the good days. The verses 2 to 7 of Ecclesiastes chapter 12 describe the inevitability of aging and death through a series of vivid metaphors, emphasizing the fragility of life. The imagery includes the darkening of celestial lights, the return of clouds after rain, and the trembling of strong men and keepers of the house, all of which reflect a somber but profound acknowledgement of life's temporality. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 7 contains one of the densest statements of all biblical wisdom, gathered in a single sentence. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. There is a perfect symmetry in these words that is not accidental. Koheleth was deliberately resuming what had been recorded in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, when God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. What was given by God returns to God. What was taken from the earth returns to the earth. Death, from this perspective, is not an anomaly. It is a conclusion predicted since creation. What this verse reveals about human nature is something that contemporary culture has increasingly difficulty accepting. The human being is composed of two distinct realities that do not confuse. The body is matter, formed from the same element that constitutes the soil, subject to the same laws that govern all matter: deterioration, decomposition, return. The spirit is something else. It was not taken from the earth. It was given directly by God, and it is to God that it returns. This means that there is a dimension of the human person that does not dissolve with the death of the body, a part that remains and reports to the Creator who originated it. Understanding this duality changes the way a person lives. If the spirit returns to God, then what happens to that spirit during life matters in a way that no material achievement can equal. Koheleth was not making an abstract philosophical statement. He was pointing to a concrete responsibility. Life does not end with the last breath of the body. It crosses this border and continues before God. Therefore, all the argumentation of Ecclesiastes chapter 12 converges to this point. The way you live now has consequences that far exceed the years you have ahead. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verses 12 and 13 brings a warning that surprises by its frankness. Making many books is a never-ending work, and much study is weariness of the flesh. This phrase, coming from a man considered the wisest of his generation, is not a depreciation of knowledge. It is a coarse correction. Koheleth had spent a good part of his life seeking wisdom with an intensity that he himself describes in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verses 13 and 17 as something that brought him more pain than relief. The more he learned about the world, the more clearly he saw the limits of what human knowledge can achieve. There is a distinction that Ecclesiastes accurately draws throughout its 12 chapters between two types of wisdom. One is the wisdom that accumulates information about the world, about how things work, about historical patterns, about philosophy and science and art. This wisdom has value, and Koheleth never completely discarded it. The other is the wisdom that knows when to stop, that recognizes the limits of human understanding, and that in the face of the mystery of God chooses reverence instead of explanation. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 11 highlights that God made everything beautiful in its time and placed eternity in the heart of man, without him being able to comprehend the works that God has done from the beginning to the end. There are things that have not been given to human intellect to solve. What Koheleth is saying in verse 12 is not that study is useless, but that study disconnected from the fear of God is a fatigue without purpose. A person can spend decades accumulating knowledge and still not know how to live, not know what to do with guilt, not know how to face death without terror. Knowledge that does not find its foundation in God revolves around itself, producing more questions than answers, more anxiety than peace. The wisdom that Ecclesiastes celebrates is not the one that fills the head, it is the one that guides the heart. And this wisdom begins, as Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 also confirms, in the fear of the Lord. After 12 chapters of observation, questioning, analysis, and brutal honesty, Ecclesiastes arrives at its conclusion. And it is surprisingly simple. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14 record, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil." After all that has been said, after all the complexity of human experience has been dissected with surgical precision, the final answer fits in 2 lines, not because it is simplistic, but because it is sufficient. The fear of God that Ecclesiastes mentions here is not fear in the sense of paralyzing terror. The Hebrew word yirah carries the meaning of profound reverence, of recognizing God's greatness in the face of human smallness, of a consciousness that shapes behavior not by coercion, but by conviction. To fear God is to live with the certainty that there is a reality greater than one's own perspective, that one's choices carry weight beyond what the eyes can see, that there is a God who cares about what you do in the shadows as much as what you do in the light of day. This awareness, when genuine, transforms how a person treats others, how they manage their possessions, how they use their time, and how they face suffering. Keeping the commandments within the context of Ecclesiastes is not a mechanical religious practice. It is the natural consequence of someone who truly fears God. Ecclesiastes does not separate the two because they do not separate. A reverence that does not produce obedience is merely religious emotion, and an obedience that does not arise from reverence is merely legalism. What Ecclesiastes chapter 12 is describing is an integrated life, where the inner and the outer correspond, where what one believes about God translates into how one lives before men. And this integrated life, according to the text, is the duty of every man, not of a privileged spiritual class, but of any human being who breathes and exists in this world. We live in a time that offers more answers than any previous generation, and at the same time produces more directionless people than ever before. Digital platforms deliver infinite content. Career options, relationships, lifestyle choices have multiplied to the point of paralyzing rather than liberating. And in the midst of so much offering, the oldest question of humanity remains unanswered for millions. What am I here for? Ecclesiastes is not an ancient book trying to answer a modern question. It is a book that proves that this question has always been the same, that the agony of existential emptiness is not an invention of the 21st century. It was there in the heart of a king who had everything and yet sat before nothing. What Ecclesiastes chapter 12 offers for our days is precisely what is lacking in most of the answers that contemporary society presents. An anchor that does not move. Philosophies change. Cultural trends alternate. What one generation considers meaningful, the next deconstructs. But the conclusion of Ecclesiastes, to fear God, to keep his commandments, to live with the awareness that there is a judgment. This conclusion has crossed millennia without losing its strength because it is not based on human opinion. It is grounded in the nature of God himself and the nature of humanity itself. And these two realities do not change with the calendar. There is a question that Ecclesiastes chapter 12 leaves in the heart of anyone who reads it honestly. In what are you investing your days? Not what you answer when someone asks, but what your habits reveal, what your priorities show, what the use of your time denounces. Ecclesiastes has gone through all the human experience available in its time: wisdom, pleasure, work, building, wealth, relationships, and returned with a conviction that none of these experiences could shake. Life only finds its meaning when it is oriented toward the Creator who originated it. Everything else, no matter how valuable it seems, is vapor that the wind carries away. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 is not a melancholic ending, it is a turning point. It is the moment when a man who looked into the depths of emptiness returns with the only thing he found there: the certainty that God is at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of everything. That youth has a purpose that goes beyond itself. That aging does not have to be lived with regret if the foundations have been well built. That death is not the final point of the story, but the passage to the judgment of a God who even knows the hidden works. And that in light of all this, the wisest answer a human being can give is not a philosophical argument, but a life lived with fear, with obedience, and with the awareness that each day received is a gift from the Creator who one day will ask for it back.